So this is what we are going to build in this mini project. We are going to build a web scraper. We can provide a hashtag, an amount of posts that should be liked, and our username and password. And we also provide a date for which we want the bot to be scheduled. When the time arrives, the bot is going to open a browser, go to Instagram and execute what we have said. Okay, it's 16:48. The bot has opened the browser. It should now navigate to cats and start liking the photos. Okay, great. Now after it's finished, it should return to the start, and that's it. And we can schedule those as many as we want. We could schedule something for 1748, something for 2021, and we can schedule an endless amount of tasks to be done. We are going to create this bot entirely in Python using a GUI, creating the web scraper using Selenium, and also using other Python libraries and tactics that you will encounter in many other projects. While creating this project, you will learn a lot of important lessons with Python. You will learn a lot of things starting from creating GUIs with TKinter, web scraping using Selenium, object-oriented developing in Python, and other libraries and tricks and tips in Python. This is going to be our development road. First of all, we are going to create a web scraper using Selenium. In this task, we are going to see how we can log into Instagram, how we can navigate to pages, like posts, and do all the other interesting stuff. After we have developed the core functionality, we are going to create the GUI that I just showed you, how in order to make it easier to interact with the bot. And in the end, we are going to create a scheduler that can actually schedule the tasks for a certain time. So we don't only run the bot when we execute the program or click on something, but rather we give a date and the bot runs on that date. We are going to use all the best practices in programming while developing this application. I hope this project motivates you and you're now interested to start. So let's get into it. I have started a brand new project here with an empty folder called production. I'm using the Visual Studio Code Editor, but you can use whatever you'd like. I find this one to be quite elegant and work nicely. The second thing you will need is the Anaconda prompt. So just type in Anaconda and you should see a Windows here. This is of course only for Windows. If you're using Linux or Mac, you can use it over your terminal. So now just navigate to your folder. This is my folder from where I am running this project. Okay, great. Now I would like to create a new source folder. Just type in new folder and type in source. Inside the source folder, I'm going to create a script called bot.py. Great. Now, since our bot is going to scrape the web, we are going to need a web scraper. For that, a great library is the Selenium library. So let's import that one. For that, type in from Selenium import WebDriver. Of course, you could also just import Selenium, but since we are going to use only the WebDriver from Selenium, you won't need that, and we can save some bandwidth and memory with that. The other libraries, quite common ones we are going to import, is the OS library. So this is the operating system library with which you can do some file manipulation. You can open, close folders, move some images on your desktop and files and so on. We can also see what our current directory is and so on. It's quite useful and we will need it probably throughout this tutorial. Now let's import time. You pretty much always need time, and import date time as well. Great. Now it's time to think how we are going to structure our application. We could write just a bunch of functions and call those functions. We can also call another function from one function and run the code in that manner. But in order to create it in a more production ready way and follow some guidelines and best practices, it would be great if we would create a class for our Instagram bot, define functions for that class and call those functions accordingly to our needs. So let's do exactly that and declare a class. Let's call the class Instagram bot. After you declare a class, you can put a colon here and two indents and define our function inside the class. Okay, great. Let's start with the first function. In order to declare a function, you need just to type in def as definition. Every class has the init function. What does the init function do? It gets called whenever we create an object of our class. We are going to create an object of the class shortly, so you will see this in action. Now, this is like a constructor for our class. We can pass parameters to it. Since we are creating an Instagram bot, we will need to log in into Instagram. We will also need to define the amount of posts we want to like, and we will also define the hashtag for which posts we are going to like. So the first variable is going to be self. The self variable represents the instance of a class. We can have multiple instances of a class. So if we have a class car, we can have multiple cars. But the self instance is going to reference exactly this instance of that class. Let's declare the other parameters. This is going to be username, password, amount, and hashtag. Now again, a colon here and two indents. Now we need to declare the variables inside our class. For that, we are going to use the self variable again. Self username is going to be equal to username. So what have we done here? When we create our class, we are passing a username. Then we are creating a class variable called username, which exactly has the value of that particular object. You will see this in action in a few seconds. Let's declare the other ones. Password is equal to password. Let's declare self amount is equal to amount. And let's declare self hashtag is equal to hashtag. Great. What is the next step we need to do? We need to log in into our Instagram account in order to be able to like different posts. So for that, since this is going to be some part of the logic on its own, it's great to create a new function for that. Let's define a new function called login, in which again we pass the self variable. So what could we do now with the self variable? If in the login we need to pass the username and password, we could use the self.username here, username. And this is going to be exactly the username we passed in here. Why do we need this? Because if we would have a username variable here, this variable would override the variable for our particular object. And if you want to have multiple objects, that wouldn't work. Even if you don't have multiple objects, in this case, it's always best practice to declare those variables with self. Okay, great. We don't need this for now. So the first step we need to do inside the login is navigate to our page. For that, we need to use the WebDriver from Selenium we have imported earlier. But first of all, we need to initialize it. So let's initialize a new variable called self_driver is equal to WebDriver.Chrome. So we are going to create a new Chrome instance in which our automated Python script is going to navigate through. In order to do that, we need an executable Chrome driver. Let's open Google and type in Chrome driver. You could also use Firefox or Internet Explorer, it doesn't really matter, but for now we are going to use Chrome. And navigate to downloads. We are going to take the latest version here and just download the Chrome driver for Windows 32. If you're using Mac or Linux, of course, download the corresponding version. Now, inside of downloads, just extract the file. Let's extract it here, open it, copy it to your folder, which is our source folder, and just paste it in here. So when we get back, we are having this Chrome driver.x file. When initializing the WebDriver, we need to reference to that location. Since it's in the source folder, we can just type in Chrome driver.x. If it was in a different folder, we would need to navigate to that folder here. Now we can actually navigate to the login page by calling the driver, self driver. As you can see, we are calling the variable here and calling a function on it. The function is called get. The get function is going to navigate us to the web page we desire. In this case, it's going to be https www.instagram.com accounts login. Great. Now we have specified that. If you would like to go deeper into Selenium, you can go to the official documentation and see how this works. You can just navigate to navigating, and here you see the first thing you'll want to do with WebDriver is navigate to a link. The normal way to do this is by calling the get method. So that is exactly what we are doing here. You have a lot of different functions here which you can go through depending on the needs, and I will always reference to the documentation as we use different functions. Great. Now we need to create an instance of our class, which we are going to do in the following way. Just call ig is equal to Instagram bot, and now we need to pass in the parameters. Of course, the self, we are not passing the self in, this is there by default, but we are passing the other 4 arguments in here. It's going to be the username. For now, I'm just going to use a test username, then test password, then some amount, and a hashtag that's going to be test again. One final step before we run this is to open Anaconda and install Selenium. Just type in pip install Selenium. I have already installed Selenium, so it's just going to say requirements already satisfied, but if you haven't, you should see a lot of scripts running here to install Selenium. After this is done, we can run our program by just typing in Python and the name of our program, which is bot.py. Oh, I made an error. I need to navigate to source and run it here. Okay, great. This opened the browser. We forgot one little thing to do, and this is actually call the login. We could do the following. We could call it inside here, ig.login, or another method would be to log in from our init function. Since we are having a set certain of actions, we are going to call it from inside the init function. So let's call it through self login, and that's it. Another thing always nice to do when doing web scraping is to use the time.sleep function. Why? Because if we need to wait for a web page to load, we need to, if we are trying to access, for example, a certain class or ID or a web page, before it's loaded automatically, it's going to throw an exception. So it's always nice to wait for a few seconds before the web page loads and then try to execute your algorithms on it. So let's try to run this again. bot.py. Okay, it navigated to the login page. Now, the next step after we have opened the browser and navigated to the login page is to actually fill out the fields and click on the login button. So, how are we going to do that? Before we start, let me just replace the username with a real username, test, and a password of NovelTech Media. We're going to like 2 posts in cars. Great. Now, after we are on the web page, we need to select a field with the WebDriver and click on it. Let me write it down first and explain how this works. We are going to call WebDriver wait with the self driver. We are going to wait 20 seconds until self.ec presence of element located self by name username. Okay, what have I written here? First of all, we could just call the driver self.driver and call find by element. But the problem of this approach is that we need to wait for the element to be available. We could have one approach, just give a time.sleep and call it then, which would work again. But there is a more elegant way, because in this case we are waiting for 5 seconds and then trying to execute. But in this case, when it's present, we are constantly checking when it's present and then we are executing it, but we are giving a maximum of 20 seconds to wait. In order for this to work, we need to import a few things first. So let's import it. From Selenium WebDriver support UI import WebDriver wait. Now we can copy this part from Selenium WebDriver support import expected conditions as EC, as EC, and again here instead of support it's common.py import py. Okay, what are those doing? First of all, we have the expected conditions, which gives us certain type of conditions. We can check for a presence of element, we can check for a presence of a button, for a presence of an ID, and so on. The by one defines by what we are searching. We could be searching by an ID, by a class, by XPath, and this is what we are specifying here. Also, as you notice, we have by small written here and EC as well small. We could replace this and use this by, but we want to have those inside of our init function. So what we are going to do is declare a self.by is equal to by and a self.ec is equal to EC. As I mentioned, we could use those directly in here, or we can declare those as variables of this class and access them throughout the self variable. Both would work equally. When you're developing, you're going to notice there are a lot of functions which, like this one, come out of nowhere and you maybe don't understand how they work or where they are coming from. In order to learn this, you always need to reference the documentation. When you go to the documentation under weights, you can see there are certain types of functions that wait until something is loaded and then execute on it. So as you can see, we have the WebDriver wait here, which uses our driver that we have initialized. It waits until a condition, presence of an element, and we are searching the element, in this case by ID, and in our case we are searching it by name. Okay, now we need to do the same thing for the password. Let's copy this here and paste it, just change it to password. As you see, when you're going to the Instagram page and working with web scraping, you need always to inspect the element and see what you can find here. For example, we have here an input class called like that, so we could maybe search it by that class. But we have also the name username, and it is much more likely that Instagram isn't going to change the name username to something else, but the name of this class is most probably going to change at some point. So it's always the best if you can navigate through this type of settings instead of just going to a class or an ID. But there are some cases where you're not able to do that and you really need to just pick the ID and go by the ID. One thing you can also do is copy the XPath and go through the XPath to that location. For example, if you copy the XPath of this, it is going to be something like that. And this would work exactly as it is, but as you can see, it is quite ugly, and if Instagram changes something in their divs and other HTML tags, it's not going to work anymore. So the next one is the login button. The login button, when you go to it and click on the inspect element, doesn't have anything interesting we could use. We just have the type submit. We can see it's a button. There is a class, we could go over the class, but as I have mentioned, there are in most cases better solutions. So let's copy it again. We are not going to wait for the presence of the element. We are going to check if the element is clickable. I mean, the presence would most likely work, but it doesn't mean that the button as loaded is automatically clickable. So we are going to go with element to be clickable. Now we are going to search by XPath. As you can see, there is a search by ID, by name, and by XPath. Okay, what do we know about the login button? We know that it contains the text login. So a way to write this is by // contains text. Now we specify the text that it contains, and this is log in. We close the bracket, we close the other bracket, and that should be it. So now it should be searching for the login button, wait for it to be clickable, wait a maximum of 20 seconds, and then execute on that. So what have I just done with XPath? If you go to the official documentation, you can see the type of things I have used here. You can maybe use a ceiling. If you open the ceiling, you can see how it looks like. So depending on what you are going to be using, there is an official documentation for XPath here. I'm also not an expert in that, but this is something quite common when you are searching. For example, you could have also specified the type of which you are searching here. Instead of the star, you could have specified I'm searching only for buttons that contain the word login. After we have found those elements, it's time to execute on them. So in order to do that, we are going to access our driver through the self variable, and we are going to find element by name. We are going to specify the username for which we are searching. After we have found the element, we can call the function sendKeys, which is going to pass the parameters we would like to the element we just found to be username. So we are going to pass the self.username here. We can also do the same for the password, self-driver find element by name. Now we're going to go for the password. We're going to click on send keys and we're going to pass the self.password. Great. After we have done that, it is time to log in. Now we are going to call again self. This is red here because I'm using WebDriver with a small w. It should be like that. And one more thing is I'm calling self.small WebDriver, so we need to do the same here. Self.WebDriver is equal WebDriver like that. Now we are accessing that WebDriver, but we could also remove the self and just access this WebDriver, as we have done with the EC and by variables as well. So now we are accessing the driver again, and we are finding our element by XPath. We are going to copy the same XPath here. After we have found the element, it is time to click on it. Now we can just type in click and we are going to click on the element or the button login. Okay, it's time to test this now. Let's open Anaconda again, type in Python. Should navigate to the login page now. Now let's recap again. We are waiting for the driver of the presence of certain elements or for the elements to be clickable. When this is the case, we are going to find the element, send the keys, so input the username and password and click the login button. So one more problem we have there is that we are declaring the self by EC and web drivers after we are calling self.login. So this means that those wouldn't be available inside the login function. Quick way to fix this is just to reverse the order here and place that piece of code here. Now, if we go back and execute python bot.py, it is going to open the page, navigate to the login, input the user data, and log into our account. Yeah, we had success with this one. Okay, the next part would be to navigate to our page where we are going to search for the tags and then start liking the posts there. So for this we are going to create a new function here. We are going to define the function as explore hashtags, pass again the self variable and the hashtag. Great. After we have logged in, also one thing to consider is again to take a little break, because sometimes it could take a few seconds for the page to load before we are going to execute any further. After we have logged in, waited for 5 seconds, we are going to hit the explore hashtags function. And we are going to pass as a parameter the self.hashtag. Great. Now this hashtag is going to be available down here. As you can see, I have written this in 2 ways. I have passed the self hashtag to the explore hashtag here. For example, in the login, we haven't used that. we have just used the self username and self password. It is generally a better approach to pass the parameter down to the function, but since we haven't done this in the login one, I'm also going to leave this blank here. Now the same principle again, type in self driver. Now the function is get, and we are going to navigate to https://www.instagram.com/explore/tags/ and then we are going to add the tag that we want to explore. That is going to be our self.hashtag. Great. This should now navigate us to the explore hashtag section. We can again run this to see if it's going to work. Okay, I forgot to write the colon here. Now this should work. Let's try again. Great, the browser opens. Need some time to initialize. We log in. We wait a few seconds now, and we get redirected to the cars tags. Great. Now we could start liking the posts. Let's define a new function here, which we are going to call like posts. Again, self. Okay, so what are we going to do in this step? We need to find the element in which the card is, and then we need to click on it. So when we open Instagram here, we see those cards. Okay, now we can click on inspect element. We need to click again, and now this is our card. So inside of this card, as you can see, there is nothing really specifically for which we could search for. There is a class of this div, then there is this image here. So it seems like we are going to need to use a class for that. But as you can see, all those images have the class of v1nh3. And if we continue, we always see those ones. So when we click on that class, the image should open for us. So click, it opens. Then when it opens, we need to click like and click the next one here. So first, let's open it. For that, we are going again to call self.driver.find element by name, by class. By class name, and the class is v1nh3, and then we are going to click on it, just like we have done with the login button. Nothing different here. Now what we have to do is loop through the amount of times we want to like an image, click on the like button, and click the next button. So for that, we could create a variable called I and set it to 1. Now we need to loop through the elements. So while I is smaller or equal to our self.amount, colon, we again need to wait for the element to be loaded. We could again use the WebDriver wait and do the same principle, or we could just use the time.sleep. Since it pretty much in 99.9% of cases opens right now, we will need to sleep for 1 second, or we could maybe do it for 2 seconds in order to just look at it, how it likes the images. Now we need again the driver to find our element that likes. So if you go to the like one and inspect on it, again, we see there is a class. This is an SVG here. We see it has a class height. There is nothing really too particular about it. Okay, it is inside a button which has this class. So that's something we could be using for identifying the little heart. Or we could go maybe even a bit further and use the entire span to click on that. So let's do that. Again, find element by class name. Then our class name is fr66n, and we are going to again click on it. Great. Now we just need to click on the arrow to move to the right. Now again, self driver find element by class name. Now we just need the class name of the arrow, and then we're going to again click on it. Let's go to the arrow, click inspect element, and as we can see, there is a class of core sprite right page navigation arrow. Great. Let's copy that. That's something easy to remember. We again click on it, and we need to increment our eye now, since we have liked one image. So we're going to do this for the amount of images we would like to like. Now, after we have finished that, we could maybe remove or go back from our site to the main Instagram website. So that's going to be https://www.instagram.com. Now we could test this out. Also keep in mind that since I just created this account for this purpose, Instagram could be detecting that this is a bot and blocking access, but let's see what's going to happen. Okay, it logged in successfully. Now we should navigate to the cars tag. Great. Now we should open it and like the one. Okay, Instagram detected that it's a bot and that we shouldn't keep too much activity on it. But as you can see, we started the browser, we logged in successfully, navigated to the tags, liked the tags, and navigated back. At this point, we could also close the browser down. Okay, so far we have created our web scraper. We are on the Instagram page, we navigate to our tags, we like the tags, and we go back. So the next thing is to actually create the user interface, the graphical user interface for our application, where we will be able to provide a username, password, the amount, and hashtags, and also the time at which we want to schedule our scraper. Okay, let's create a new class for that. If you want to watch the entire video, you can either watch it on this channel, the video is going to be linked at the end of this one, or you can head over to NovelTech Media and watch the entire video over there. So thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and see you next time.